There was a time Julia Marine could predict her life with the precision of an airport schedule. Mondays were for strategic meetings, Wednesdays for content planning, Fridays for status updates. At home, Tuesdays were pasta nights, Thursdays she watered the ferns, and Sundays Gavin always made breakfast. It wasn't exciting, but it was stable, something she'd fought for after a youth defined by chaos. She wasn't just good at routines, she thrived in them. Julia, 42, had worked at Stratusnet Technologies for nearly 9 years. Her office overlooked the Flatirons in Boulder, Colorado, a view she once described as her daily meditation. As senior marketing director, she managed a team of 6 and had personally led the company's largest product launch to date, an achievement that had gotten her mentioned, if only briefly, in a tech magazine she kept folded in the back of her filing cabinet. Her husband, Gavin, had joined Stratusnet 3 years after her. He was tall, calm, carried an air of aloof brilliance, and handled development logistics with enviable ease. Julia had helped get him the interview. She'd also helped him revise his resume and coached him through his first pitch to the board. When he got the role, they laughed in the car, holding hands like teenagers. "We're going to be a power couple," he said, brushing her hair behind her ear. For a while, they were. Office whispers about their dynamics swirled, but neither of them cared. They kept things professional, sat on different floors, rarely shared meetings. Yet everyone knew Gavin and Julia Marin were Stratusnet's royal couple. That illusion began to fracture one Wednesday afternoon when Julia's assistant forwarded her a meeting request labeled Performance Review Adjustment, Executive Feedback Discussion. The subject line was odd, and it wasn't even review season. Julia frowned, checked the calendar. The request came from Simon Lawton, the new VP of People Operations, a man whose LinkedIn profile featured the word disruptive 5 times. Gavin had sung Simon's praises more than once. The meeting was brief, uncomfortably so. Simon's language was polished but evasive. He used words like misalignment, cultural shift, and brand refresh. Julia listened, confused, until the final line made her freeze. "We've decided to sunset your position, Julia. You'll have support during the transition." She blinked. "I'm sorry. Are you letting me go?" Simon adjusted his cufflinks. "It's not personal. We're simply moving in a new direction. Leaner, faster, more adaptable." "Leaner? You just hired 3 junior content strategists last quarter." He offered a closed-lip smile. "That's the direction Gavin recommended." Silence. Did he just say Gavin? Julia sat still, her heartbeat pulsing in her ears. She felt it before she understood it. Betrayal, slow, deliberate, and camouflaged in corporate jargon. "I'd like to see that recommendation," she said quietly. Simon's expression twitched. "I don't think that's... I helped build the marketing arm of this company from the ground up. I have every right to understand why I'm being removed from it." He hesitated, then pulled up a file. Julia's eyes scanned the document, stomach flipping. There it was. Suggested areas for optimization. Executive roles overlapping in strategic vision. Recommend streamlining marketing leadership to allow product development more direct influence on brand evolution. Signed, G. Marin. She didn't say a word as she walked out. Her face felt frozen, her mouth dry. She drove home in silence, ignoring 3 missed calls from Gavin, who had the audacity to leave a voicemail saying, "Hey, I heard about your meeting. Let's talk before you spiral, okay?" She didn't spiral. She simmered. Gavin came home late that evening, smelling like a new cologne. Something too sharp, too performative. Julia sat at the kitchen island, laptop open, but untouched. "Want to talk now?" she asked without looking up. Gavin placed his keys down like he always did, except this time he didn't kiss her cheek. He walked to the fridge, poured himself a drink, and leaned against the counter like a guest in someone else's home. "I figured you'd be upset," he said casually. "Upset?" she repeated, still not looking at him. "You've been out of sync with the company for a while now, Jules. I tried to tell you gently, but you didn't want to hear it. You recommended I be fired." "I didn't recommend that," she spun to face him. "Then what would you call signing off on my removal?" He sighed like she was a stubborn child. "I called for a restructure. It's not personal. You said I was holding you back." He flinched. The mask slipped for half a second. "Where did you hear that?" Julia stood, her voice shaking from restraint. Simon, he quoted you directly. Gavin didn't apologize, he just tilted his head and said, "Maybe I was just being honest." You haven't evolved with the times, Jules. You still treat marketing like it's print media. This company needs edge, innovation, and frankly, I'm tired of carrying you. She felt like the air had been knocked from her lungs. I carried you, she hissed. I got you that job. Gavin shrugged. Yeah. And I surpassed you. It happens. Julia didn't speak again that night. She packed a bag, one coat, her old MacBook, and left while he was in the shower. He never chased after her. Julia slept on a borrowed couch that week. Raina's place smelled like fresh laundry and old hardwood. It grounded her. In the morning, she drank bitter coffee and stared out the window, watching early joggers and sunrise paint the sky with possibilities she hadn't considered in years. She started journaling, not the type with bullet points or gratitude lists, real writing. Memories, details, her earliest days at Stratusnet. The first time Gavin used the phrase, "let's be strategic," to dismiss her opinion in a meeting. The time he told her to dial it down before a presentation because the board was mostly older men. She wrote it all down. Because it mattered now. Because something inside her had shifted. Not broken, but cracked open like a shell revealing a spark she hadn't known was still there. By day 5, she had a plan, and by day 6, she made a call, not to Gavin. To a woman named Layla Monroe, a venture capitalist who once approached Julia years ago, back when Julia had pitched a small consultancy called Lucent Field. Gavin had convinced her to turn it down, said it was too risky. Julia had saved the number anyway. When Layla picked up, Julia's voice was steady. "Are you still looking for someone who understands both strategy and sabotage?" Layla laughed softly. "Always." The second time Julia saw Gavin after the firing, he was dressed for a victory parade. 3 weeks had passed since she walked out of their home. She hadn't returned, not to grab clothes, not to collect books, not even to water the fiddle leaf fig she'd nursed through 4 winters. She'd sent an assistant to pack her office, ignoring the HR rep's offer to help coordinate her exit experience. And she'd blocked Gavin's number the morning after he sent a text that read, "We both deserve to grow. Don't make this harder than it has to be." So when she saw him again, at a Thursday evening Stratusnet networking event hosted at a rooftop bar in downtown Denver, he was already laughing in a circle of people who didn't know what he'd done. He didn't see her at first. She arrived with Layla Monroe, the venture capitalist whose sharp eyes missed nothing. Layla wore a white suit like a blade and introduced Julia to 3 founders and a fintech executive who would later fund Lucent Field's pre-seed round. It wasn't until Gavin turned toward the bar that their eyes met. Julia didn't flinch. He did, just for a second. A blink. But she saw it. The falter in his posture, the shift in his jaw. She raised her glass slightly in acknowledgement, not a greeting but a warning, then turned back to her conversation with Layla. Later, Gavin cornered her near the bathroom hallway, away from the music and polite laughter. "You look good," he said, as if they were old flames meeting by coincidence. Julia didn't smile. "I am good." He scratched the back of his neck. "Listen, I didn't expect to see you here. I thought you were taking time to process. To process losing my job? Or to process being stabbed in the back by my husband?" He stiffened. "Julia, come on, that's not fair." "You submitted a termination recommendation with my name on it, Gavin. That's not unfair. That's a signature." He exhaled loudly, lowering his voice. "You were stuck, Julia. I saw it. You weren't growing, and you were dragging things down. Someone had to do something. So you did it for me? I did it for both of us." Julia took a small step forward, voice cold and calm. "No, you did it because you thought no one would challenge you. You thought I'd disappear quietly, didn't you? I thought you'd land on your feet. You mean, I thought you'd crumble and I'd get the promotion." He didn't deny it. And that was the last moment Julia ever thought about saving anything between them. Over the next 2 months, Julia moved in silence. Raina helped her establish a temporary LLC structure for Lucent Field, and Layla introduced her to a designer in LA who rebranded the business with colors Julia described as steel, ash, and sunrise. The new tagline? Strategic clarity for the voices you ignored. She set up shop in a borrowed co-working space and began writing again, not just in journals but in strategic plans, pitch decks, brand blueprints. At first, it felt like muscle memory, then it felt like oxygen. Julia wasn't rebuilding. She was returning. Lucent Field gained traction almost immediately. Julia focused on a very specific niche. Mid-sized companies run by women or minorities that had been passed over for Series A funding or overlooked by traditional marketing firms. Her approach was surgical, empathetic, brilliant, and quietly devastating to companies like Stratusnet. Because in every pitch she gave, in every workshop she led, she told a version of her story. Not the name, not the betrayal, but the theme. Don't let legacy brands tell you how small your voice is. And people listened. Within 8 weeks, she closed 6 contracts and turned down 3 more. One morning, while reviewing analytics on her website, she noticed something odd. Repeated hits from IP addresses traced back to Stratusnet's internal servers. Someone was watching. She didn't need to guess who. What Julia didn't expect, however, was to be approached by Pendrake Equity Partners, a firm she'd once tried, and failed, to get funding from in her early 30s. The name still brought a sour taste to her mouth, but this time, they weren't looking to invest in her. They were looking to acquire Stratusnet. "Your name came up in our due diligence," said the senior partner, a man named Hal Spence, during their call. "Apparently you built the original brand architecture. We'd like your opinion on its current trajectory." Julia took a breath. "What are you really asking, Hal?" He paused, then said flatly, "Do you think this company can survive 5 more years of its current leadership?" She smiled slowly. "No." The meeting that followed was confidential, precise, and delicious. Julia outlined every flaw, every missed opportunity, every structural weakness, many of which Gavin had exacerbated. "The product team lacks emotional intelligence and cross-functional vision," she said casually. "You'll need to cull from the top down. Otherwise, the marketing department will remain a scapegoat for every failed launch." Hal raised an eyebrow. "You'd recommend firing the current director of product?" Julia met his eyes. "I wouldn't recommend. I'd insist." That night, Julia sat in Raina's guest room, cross-legged on the floor, sorting through old folders. She found an envelope marked "Never Used." Inside was a proposal she'd written for Stratusnet 5 years ago, an internal training program meant to help women in tech leadership rise within the company. Gavin had dismissed it at the time, calling it a distraction from core metrics. Now, Julia opened her laptop and rewrote the whole thing, not as an internal program, as a cornerstone initiative of Lucent Field. She titled it Reframe, Scaling Without Apology. Cham! 2 weeks later, she got the news. Pendrake Equity had submitted a formal acquisition offer to Stratusnet's board. And it was accepted. They were going to own the company within 60 days. Hal called again. "We'll need someone to oversee the transition of the marketing arm and advise the board on personnel reshuffling. Would you be available for a consulting role?" Julia didn't hesitate. "Only if it's on my terms," he agreed. The contract was signed by Monday. She was officially returning to Stratusnet, but this time, she was coming through the front door with the keys. And Gavin? He had no idea. He walked into work every day in his new tailored suits, completely unaware that the foundation beneath him was already crumbling, and that the woman he said was holding him back had just positioned herself to remove him first. The first morning Julia woke up without Gavin, she didn't cry. She stared at the ceiling of Raina's guest room, listening to the birds outside and the muffled creak of the old house shifting in the cold. It was quiet, not peaceful, quiet, like the deep breath before a scream. Raina, as always, respected her silence. There was coffee on the stove and a small note on the counter. "Take the day, or take the world. Up to you." Julia took the coffee. Then she took the world, quietly. She didn't announce anything on LinkedIn, didn't post vague inspirational quotes or a cropped black and white photo with a caption like "New Beginnings." She wasn't interested in appearances anymore. What she wanted was clarity, precision, retaliation wrapped in excellence. She pulled her old laptop from the bag she'd taken when she walked out. It booted slowly, a survivor of time and wear. Inside was a folder she hadn't opened in 7 years. Lucent Field. Lucent Field had been her idea. Her first real act of courage after her son went off to college. a consulting concept focused on scaling marketing strategy for startups led by underrepresented founders. She had business plans, brand sketches, a network list, a partial logo. But Gavin, sweet, rational Gavin, had called it a vanity project. You don't build empires off sentiment, Jules. She'd believed him, shut it down before it had the chance to breathe. Now, as she clicked open that dusty folder and saw the original pitch deck titled, "Your Story Has Power," something inside her snapped into alignment. Not out of anger, out of recognition. She hadn't been weak, she'd been suppressed. The next step came with a whisper and a spreadsheet. Raina had always been a creature of structure, and when Julia told her she was ready to rebuild Lucent Field, her friend didn't say "good for you" or "are you sure?" She asked, "What's your burn rate?" Julia blinked. You want to hit hard? We'll hit legally and financially. You don't need hype. You need a war room." So they built one. It started with 3 people. Ava Nguyen, a data-savvy project manager Gavin had once mocked for overcomplicating simple timelines, who now ran Julia's entire operational flow. Jonas Powell, ex-copy lead from a rival firm, forced out after accusing his manager of plagiarism. Lily Moreno, once a Stratusnet intern who Julia had mentored years ago, now a skilled digital strategist hungry for redemption. They met in Raina's dining room, laptops open, whiteboard markers in hand, the air thick with purpose. "Let's be clear," Julia said that first night. "We're not just building a business, we're building a statement." Lily raised her glass of supermarket rosé. "Here's to being underestimated." They found a space 2 weeks later, a second-floor walk-up above a forgotten print shop near downtown Lafayette. The walls were faded green, the light flickered, and it smelled faintly of old ink and determination. Perfect. Julia bought a long, battered oak table at a yard sale for $40 and declared it their command center. She covered the windows in butcher paper. No signs, no branding, just quiet work. Their first client came from a single tweet. A founder in Seattle passed over for funding 3 times despite positive traction, posted, "Tired of agencies telling me my story isn't sexy enough." Lily messaged her instantly, "You haven't met us." 2 Zoom calls later, the contract was signed. Lucent Field was officially in motion. But the real victory came quietly, like rain softening the earth before a storm. Julia began appearing, subtly, on the periphery of the tech world again. She signed up for a panel on narrative strategy in startup ecosystems at a boutique summit in Arizona, then a guest article on the ethics of messaging for an industry blog. Always under her name, never referencing Stratusnet, never alluding to Gavin. She wasn't erasing the past, she was transcending it. Clients followed, then press inquiries, then whispers. "Isn't that the woman from... Didn't she used to be married to?" She ignored it all. Instead, she worked. Harder than ever, smarter than ever. Smarter. One Friday afternoon, Julia sat alone in the office. The others had gone home early, and she had her hands wrapped around her old cracked mug again. Outside, the wind kicked up. She stared at a wall of sticky notes they'd labeled "retaliation, but make it sustainable." That's when her phone buzzed. It was an email from Layla Monroe, subject line, "Something you'll want to see." Julia clicked. Attached was a forwarded deck from Pendrake Equity Partners, a detailed review of Stratusnet's internal structures and succession plans. There, on slide 6, under the section titled Leadership Efficiency Review, was Gavin's name. Next to it, Limited Collaborative Resilience, Potential Redundancy. Julia read it. Once, twice, then leaned back. She didn't smile. Instead, she whispered, "You said I was holding you back. I just cleared the way." Gettery. The final straw came a week later. Gavin showed up in a podcast episode titled Leading Through Disruption. Julia almost skipped it, but Lily insisted. "He name-dropped you," she said, dropping her phone on the table. Julia listened, sipped tea, took notes. Gavin's voice, smooth and calculated as ever, filled the room. "Sometimes tough decisions need to be made. We had people who were no longer aligned with the company's future. I had to step up and lead. Not everyone liked it." Then, a pause. Even my personal life took a hit. But you can't drag dead weight into innovation. Julia froze. Dead weight. That was how he framed her, after 20 years, after mentoring him, building with him, fighting beside him. That night, she didn't go home. She stayed in the office, ordered takeout, turned off the lights, and sat in the dark with a single lamp, the spreadsheet from Pendrake open in front of her. She edited one line on a draft proposal Hal had sent her weeks earlier, where it once said, "Consultant, Julia Marine, Strategic Transition Oversight." She changed it to Strategic Lead, Julia Marine, Oversight and Termination Planning, then clicked Save. The first thing they noticed was the silence. Not the absence of noise, but the charged, intentional kind. The kind that turned heads, the kind that filled a room not with emptiness, but with presence. Julia stepped into the Catalyst West Tech Summit in San Jose wearing a structured navy blazer, tailored slacks, and a soft gray blouse that didn't scream for attention. It commanded it. Her hair was pinned in a low bun, simple makeup, no jewelry except a thin silver watch. But it wasn't the outfit that made people pause. It was her expression, calm, composed, sharp enough to cut through glass. A woman approached her at check-in, holding a clipboard. "Julia Marin?" she asked, blinking rapidly. "The Julia Marin?" Julia nodded once. "I think so. You're our keynote substitute for Dr. Keller. He had a family emergency. We're honored to have you." Julia raised an eyebrow. "Well, let's not waste the opportunity." The last time she had stood on a stage was 5 years ago at a StratusNet internal retreat, where Gavin had insisted on presenting their joint project alone. "You're too conceptual," he'd said. "They want the big vision, not the story." Now, standing under soft lights in front of 200 entrepreneurs, executives, and investors, Julia didn't offer vision, she offered truth. Her talk was titled, "The Price of Being Underestimated: Why Narratives Fail When Women Stay Silent." For 22 minutes, she spoke without slides. No props, no fluff. She told the story, not hers explicitly, but of a strategist who helped build a company from the ground up, only to be discarded when it outgrew the need for integrity. The audience listened with frozen faces, some shifting uncomfortably, others nodding slowly. Then she delivered the line that split the room in two. They called her dead weight. But dead weight doesn't rise, restructure, and buy your boardroom out from under you. A pause. The air crackled. People weren't just clapping, they were sitting upright, alert, some grabbing their phones, others whispering. It wasn't just a speech, it was a declaration. Gavin wasn't in the audience, but Lana was. She sat 3 rows from the front, mouth slightly parted. Her expression said it all. She had no idea. She'd underestimated Julia as a tech wife, a former marketing exec who'd fade into irrelevance after the separation. Now here was Julia, re-emerging like a queen from exile, unapologetically reshaping the battlefield. Julia didn't look at her once, but when she exited the stage and saw Lana near the media lounge, she nodded politely. Lana approached, cautious. "I didn't know you were speaking today," she said. Julia's smile didn't reach her eyes. Neither did most people. "Isn't that funny?" Lana tried to regroup. "You know, Gavin always said you were sharp. I guess I just never saw you in action." Julia tilted her head slightly. "That's the thing about women like me. We don't perform, we execute." Bam-ams. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Lucent Field was accelerating like a rocket. The second quarter brought in 3 enterprise clients and 2 government-adjacent contracts through referral. Ava expanded the operations team. Lily started mentoring interns. Jonas rebranded their case study series as Underspoken Wins, the most read article of the month. 10 founders who were told no before changing everything, powered by Lucent Field. Julia refused interviews at first. Then a podcast reached out, She Who Built, a show dedicated to comeback stories. The host was an ex-lawyer turned venture partner who had followed Julia's StratusNet career back when she was still just Mrs. Gavin Marin. "Would you mind if I asked about the rumors?" the host asked gently during the pre-call. Julia's voice didn't waver. "Go ahead. You were fired. And then you, what, took on the whole industry?" Julia chuckled. "Not the industry. Just the part that thought I was disposable." The episode aired 2 weeks later and went viral within 48 hours. Stratusnet employees started whispering in Slack channels. "She's the reason Pendrake's review was so detailed. I heard she's behind the reorg plan. Wait, is she the new strategic lead?" And then came the formal announcement. Pendrake Equity Partners is proud to welcome Julia Marin as Strategic Oversight Consultant for the post-acquisition transition of Stratusnet Technologies. The message went live on their website. Gavin saw it on a Tuesday morning while checking his calendar. He stared at the screen for a full minute, then closed the tab and walked out of his office. That Friday, Stratusnet held its quarterly leadership meeting. Julia was not invited, but she didn't need to be. Her presence was in the deck, the new operational structure, the eliminated roles, and the performance-based termination clause that had been added at her suggestion. She had reviewed every department head's record, and Gavin's was full of red flags. Not scandals, not corruption, just hubris, missed deadlines masked with buzzwords. Strategic overreach, cross-functional dysfunction, a tendency to take credit for team efforts, and worst of all, failure to retain top-tier female talent. Julia had highlighted that line in red. That evening, Gavin called. He left a voicemail, his tone artificially light, but the desperation bled through. "Hey, saw the Pendrake news. Didn't realize you were consulting for them. Small world, huh?" Then, after a pause, "You know, Jules, maybe we should talk. I've been thinking a lot. About us. About everything. Maybe it's not too late to..." She deleted it without listening further. The next morning, Ava came into the office holding a box of branded stationery samples for Lucent Field's first workshop. "I love this one," she said, pulling out a minimalist design in bone white and plum. Julia nodded, reaching for the top envelope. It read, "To the woman they thought wouldn't fight back." She stared at it, something deep and old and powerful cracking open inside her. This wasn't revenge, this was reclamation. There was a difference between revenge and justice. Revenge was messy, loud, fueled by rage and impulsive decisions. Justice, on the other hand, was deliberate, clinical. A blade so sharp it drew no blood, until you looked down and realized you were already bleeding. Julia Marin had no interest in revenge. She was here for justice. The wheels had been turning for months now, every move calculated, every conversation documented, every pattern of behavior traced back to a single truth. Gavin had never expected her to fight back. Even now, with Pendrake's acquisition nearing its final stage, Gavin still didn't see her coming. He saw her emails, he heard her name in meetings, but he didn't see her. Because men like Gavin didn't see women like Julia, until they were standing behind the curtain holding the lever that opened the trapdoor. And it was almost time to pull it. That Thursday morning, Julia arrived at the Pendrake satellite office early. Not to impress anyone, just to make sure the boardroom door would swing open under her hand. The final transition summit for Stratusnet was scheduled for 10 o'clock a.m. 12 attendees, 10 decisions, 1 execution. She laid out her notes, reviewed her printouts, and flipped to the final page. Gavin's profile. His metrics weren't bad, but that was never the point. His flaw wasn't performance, it was arrogance. And arrogance, unchecked, eventually eats itself alive. The meeting began precisely on time. Gavin entered at 10:02, Starbucks in hand, wearing a navy suit she'd never seen before. His smile was hollow, too many teeth, not enough truth. He took a seat across from her, not beside her. Already the energy had shifted. Julia greeted the room, and then the doors closed. "Thank you all for being here," she began calmly. "As Strategic Oversight Lead, I've compiled the final personnel recommendations for Q3. This list is the product of 3 months data aggregation, leadership surveys, departmental audits, and a few difficult truths." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Some of these decisions will be unpopular. All of them will be necessary. She clicked the remote. The screen behind her lit up. Restructure 3.0, optimization, realignment, and release. The first 3 slides were simple. marketing shakeups, redundant titles removed, a few consolidations. Then came slide 4, product development. Gavin straightened slightly. She could see it, his reflexive attempt to steel himself, to dominate the space before it turned on him. Julia didn't look at him yet. Instead, she calmly read the bullet points. Decline in cross-team engagement, spike in anonymous HR complaints, lapses in documentation, resource bottlenecks during sprints, delayed prototype cycles, reduced retention in junior staff, 6 resignations in 1 quarter. Pause. Then she turned to the board. Each of these trends centers around the same role. Click. Gavin Marin, Director of Product Development. The slide filled the screen, in white text, on red. Gavin blinked slowly, a twitch in the jaw, a tiny shift in his breathing. He knew what was coming, but still, he smiled. That signature grin, the one he used in investor meetings, the one he used when trying to charm his way out of accountability. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said, gesturing politely. "Those resignations had nothing to do with me. In fact, the people leaving were," Julia cut in gently, "burned out, muzzled, passed over." She locked eyes with him. "You didn't lead them, Gavin. You drained them." Gasps. Someone's pen clicked. He tried to recover. "Look, I get it. This is complicated. We're in transition. Emotions are high." "No," Julia said. "You're confused. This isn't personal. That would have been me terminating you the day I joined Pendrake." She stood slowly, walked toward the projector screen, and clicked forward again. "Instead, I waited. I gathered every quarter's KPI, every employee satisfaction score, every launch delay. I spoke to vendors, team leads, HR. You know what I found?" She turned around. "Everyone wanted you gone. They just didn't have the power to say it." Gavin went pale. "Julia, this is vindictive." "No, Gavin. Vindictive was what you did when you signed my termination letter behind my back and told HR I was holding you back." Her voice didn't rise. This is just math, and math doesn't lie. Just The room went dead quiet. Pendrake's general counsel shifted slightly in his seat. "To be clear, this recommendation aligns with our internal findings," he said, tapping his iPad. "Performance optimization requires letting go of legacy structures that no longer serve growth. Mr. Marin's name appears repeatedly in our red flag index." Julia stepped aside, letting the counsel finish. "In accordance with our equity terms, he'll receive a transitional package if he exits voluntarily within 72 hours. Gavin stood slowly. And then he laughed, low, bitter. "This is how it ends, after everything I've built?" Julia tilted her head. "You built it with my blueprints. I just took them back." He opened his mouth, closed it, looked around, but no one saved him. The boardroom had already moved on. And Julia? She simply sat back down and took a sip of water, like she hadn't just ended a man's career with one sentence and a spreadsheet. 2 hours later, Gavin was gone. He left without saying goodbye to anyone, but he did leave something behind: his badge, his laptop, and a small envelope with Julia's name scrawled across the front. Inside, one sentence, written in his jagged, all-caps handwriting: "You always needed a stage." Julia read it once, then placed it in the bottom drawer of her desk. "No," she whispered to herself. "I needed the whole theater." That night, Lucent Field hosted a small dinner at a renovated gallery downtown. Ava brought homemade wine. Jonas played terrible jazz on a borrowed speaker. Lily hung a string of twinkle lights shaped like commas. They toasted to everything they'd lost and everything they'd reclaimed. Julia stood, glass raised, and looked around the room. "This isn't a win," she said. Everyone turned. "This is just Act 1. There's a difference between winning and ruling. Winning is loud, public, celebrated. People throw parties for winners. But ruling? That's quiet, subtle, a shift in temperature. You don't realize the power has changed hands until your badge doesn't work at the door." Julia Marin wasn't just here to win. She was here to rebuild the kingdom Gavin had almost burned down. With Gavin gone, the vacuum was instant. Some employees expected chaos. Others expected revenge. What they got was structure. Julia wasted no time. By Monday, she had already met privately with every department head. She didn't yell. She didn't demand fealty. She asked them each one question. If I told you nothing from the old system had to stay, what would you do differently? It disarmed them, and it told her everything. The head of engineering confessed the team worked better on a 4-day week. The UX director revealed she'd been running informal mentorship programs Gavin had canceled to reduce distractions. The head of content, a soft-spoken man named Theo, looked her in the eye and said, "Honestly, I'd stop building for hype and start building for humans again." Julia wrote it all down, and then she set the boardroom on fire. Not literally, but it may as well have been. The next executive meeting began at 8 a.m. sharp. No coffee catered, no name placards, just folders at each seat printed on Lucent Field stationery. The top page was titled, "Reclamation, a 120-day rebuild plan." It had 5 core sections. 1. Elimination of hierarchies without accountability. 2. Restoration of ethical strategy practices. 3. Direct investment in product sustainability over tech theater. 4. Reinstatement of silenced programs, DEI mentorship wellness. 5. Voluntary departure path for legacy managers, resistant to change. The 5th section hit hardest, especially since Julia had stapled a separate envelope inside each folder. Inside, a form labeled Notice of Transition, Opt-out Clause for Executive Continuity. Translated plainly, take the severance and go peacefully, or get restructured the hard way. A full third of the room didn't return after lunch. Julia didn't blink. And people whispered, "Bloodbath." She didn't mind, because what came after was beautiful. For every VP who left, she raised someone who'd been waiting in the wings. Not just loyalists, builders. People with dusty notebooks, unfinished proposals, and energy that had been beaten down by Gavin's streamlining. In 1 week, the old director of product ops was replaced by a 29-year-old systems architect who had been stuck at mid-tier for 3 years. The PR team was merged with internal communications and given a mandate. Tell the truth, make it resonate. The DEI initiative, once buried in a side committee, became a direct report pillar to Julia's new Office of Integrity and People Power, led by none other than Ava from Lucent Field. Jonas was made editorial director. Lily began overseeing all cross-functional onboarding, and Julia moved into the corner office, not Gavin's. She had them take out the walls and convert the space into an open creative hub. She called it the workshop, no nameplate, no desk throne, just ideas and results. But of course, no reign survives without pushback. On the 3rd week, a memo leaked. An anonymous staffer had shared an internal Slack thread with a business blog. The headline read, "Is the new queen of Stratusnet cleaning house or burning bridges?" Julia read the article over lunch. Someone had described her as frighteningly composed. Another called her disruptive without apology. She didn't deny it. She forwarded the article to Ava with 1 sentence. "Print this and hang it next to the coffee maker." Ava replied with a gif of a woman lighting a match. Then came the text, from a number she didn't recognize. "You've made your point. Maybe now you can stop." Gee, she stared at it for a long moment, then replied, "I haven't even started." That weekend, Lucent Field held a strategy retreat, but not at a resort. Not at a sterile hotel conference room. They rented a decommissioned train station on the edge of town. Long tables, chalkboards, floor cushions. Everyone brought a dish. Someone played acoustic guitar. Julia stood in front of the group and posed the next question. If we weren't afraid of being shut down, what would we build? Ideas flowed like wildfire. A partnership with local women's shelters, a mentorship circle for marginalized founders, a no-code toolkit for underfunded creatives. Julia nodded, took notes, and smiled. This wasn't just retribution, it was resurrection. And she wasn't the only one rising. Chapter. On Monday morning, Julia walked into the newly transformed strategy hub. The walls were soft green, the floors gleamed with reclaimed oak. A sign hung quietly above the doorway. It didn't say CEO, it didn't say welcome, it simply read, "We're not here to prove ourselves. We're here to outlive the people who told us we couldn't." That afternoon, she received a call from Pendrake. They wanted her to join the board, not just as a transitional lead, as a partner. "You turned a crumbling asset into a flagship," Hal Spence told her. "We'd be fools not to keep you in the castle you just rebuilt." She gave it 24 hours of thought. Then she signed. That night, she sat in the old kitchen of her Lafayette office, her original headquarters. The oak table still bore the scratches of long nights and bigger dreams. She poured herself a glass of wine, and for the first time since her termination, since the day Gavin looked at her and said she was holding him back, she laughed. Soft, genuine. Not because she'd won, but because she was no longer playing their game. She'd rewritten the rules. Victory wasn't loud, not for Julia. It came in waves, quiet, steady, rolling in like tide over ruins. A week had passed since Gavin walked out of Stratusnet with a cardboard box and the weight of a legacy that was never truly his. A week since the article on TechCurrent ran a headline that read, "From housewife to powerhouse, Julia Marine reclaims the empire that discarded her." It should have felt like the climax, but for Julia, it was just Tuesday. She spent the morning not at a speaking engagement, not at a summit, but on the floor of Lucent Field's newly renovated workshop space, knees crossed, notes sprawled around her, sorting through handwritten ideas submitted anonymously by junior staff. A new mentorship model, a community creative grant, a mobile resource unit for young founders in underserved cities. Every idea mattered, because Julia wasn't building a monument to her pain. She was building a map for others to find their way out. But success brought shadows. Whispers started again. Investors nudging her team. Why not IPO? Advisors quietly suggesting, "You're the hot brand right now. You need to scale." One even said, "Julia, you've got the power now. Why not take the throne and cash out?" She didn't respond right away. But that night, alone in the office, she opened an old email draft to herself from 3 years ago. Back when she'd still been Mrs. Gavin Marin, it was never sent. Subject, "If I ever get the chance to build again." In the body, only one sentence. "Do it in a way no one else can burn it down." She closed the laptop and exhaled. No thrones, no exits, only foundations. 2 days later, Pendrake Equity invited her to a closed-door meeting. The tone was cordial. The offer was polished. They wanted to acquire Lucent Field. "Folded under the Stratusnet umbrella," Hal Spence said, offering a soft smile. "Unified message, stronger brand, cleaner portfolio. You'd still run it, of course." Julia said nothing. He leaned forward, voice low. "Name your price. You deserve to be in the headlines every quarter, not just as a case study in vengeance, as a model." She swirled the tea in her cup and looked him dead in the eye. "If you think I built this to be bought, then you still don't understand what I survived." He blinked. She stood. "My value is not for sale, but you're welcome to invest at a seat that's equal, not above." That weekend, she hosted Lucent Field's first open circle event, an idea Ava had pushed for. A free gathering where small founders, artists, and builders could pitch ideas not for funding, but for collaboration. No badges, no press, no investors, just possibility. They came by the dozens. A young man who'd aged out of the foster system and wanted to build an app that matched teens with adult mentors. A grandmother with a voice note app for people losing their memory. A teenage girl with a journal line for kids who didn't feel safe at home. Julia listened, took notes, introduced people, connected dots. She didn't speak about Gavin or about Stratusnet or the empire she'd rebuilt. She just listened. Chat. At the end of the night, a woman stayed behind, mid-50s, worn jeans, hands that had seen too much. She waited until everyone else had left, then approached slowly. "I'm not here to pitch anything," she said. Julia offered a soft smile. "Then you're exactly where you're meant to be." The woman held up a notebook. leather-bound, handmade. I bought this from your shop, one of your early ones, when I was coming out of something hard. I wrote in it every day. It saved my life. Her voice cracked. I just wanted to say thank you. Julia didn't reply right away. She reached into the side drawer and pulled out a fresh journal, navy blue, silver embossed. No charge, she said quietly, for your next chapter. Later, she walked through the old house she'd reclaimed from Gavin, the one that used to be a symbol of betrayal, now converted into Lucent Field's creative center. She paused at the wall beside the sunroom. A small plaque had just been installed. It read, "This space once belonged to a man who told her she wasn't enough. Now it belongs to the stories of everyone who ever heard the same. LF Collective, Est 2023. She stood in silence for a while, not crying, not grieving, just standing, whole. The next morning, she got a letter in the mail, no return address. Inside, a check, $10 million, and a single line handwritten across the top. You built something real. Let someone believe in it. No signature. She stared at it for a long moment, then folded it neatly and placed it into a plain envelope labeled, "If we ever need to survive again." She called Ava that night. I've decided. Ava was silent for a beat. Then, "You're not selling, are you?" Julia smiled. "No, I didn't think so. But I'm going to build a fund," Julia said. "For the others, the ones who aren't loud, the ones who still think no one's coming to save them." Ava exhaled. "Let's call it something that matters." They brainstormed for hours. Finally, Julia whispered, "Kindling?" Ava paused, then smiled through the phone. "Perfect, because even the softest spark can start a wildfire." Gavin Marin had once believed that charisma was unshakable. That even if you lost the money, the company, the house, you could still smile wide, shake a few hands, and bluff your way back into relevance. He was wrong. 3 months after being terminated from Stratusnet, Gavin found himself sitting in the back booth of a diner in Boulder, Colorado. He was nursing a black coffee that had long gone cold and reviewing a bank statement that refused to lie. He had $3,746, 20 left across all his accounts, and $94,000 in debt he had pretended didn't exist. He'd sold the Florida condo after only 6 months, at a loss. The crypto art investments were worthless. The friends who used to tag him in sleek party photos no longer returned his calls. And Lana, she was gone by week 7. It turned out that when the spotlight faded, no one stayed to watch the shadows dance. He'd tried, of course, applied for C-suite consulting gigs, sent emails to former partners, reached out to a few podcasts who had once courted him. Nothing. One startup founder replied, "No offense, Gavin, but you're not the name that moves the room anymore." The others didn't even bother. And then came the final blow. A notification from his accountant. "You are now in active dispute with the IRS." He'd underreported income for 2 years, assuming someone else had handled it, someone like Julia. But Julia was gone, or rather, she was everywhere. Her name kept popping up. At first, it was just background noise. A mention in a Forbes article, a quote in an entrepreneur.com think piece. Then came the podcast episodes, the replays, the LinkedIn resharing frenzy. Kindling Fund. It was all over social media. A grassroots initiative empowering underrepresented creators with seed capital, mentorship, and platform equity. Sponsored by Lucent Field, partnered with 3 local universities, promoted by influencers Gavin had once paid to ignore women-led hobby projects. Now those same influencers were crying on camera opening Julia's handcrafted journals. "This doesn't just feel like a product. It feels like someone believed in me before I believed in myself." The words echoed in his skull. Gavin threw his phone across the motel room and stared at the cracked ceiling fan until morning. So when the Denver Innovation Forum announced its annual gala featuring keynote builder Julia Marin, founder of Kindling and Lucent Field, Gavin didn't think. He RSVP'd, not to watch, not to clap. He didn't even know why. Only that some part of him wanted to see her again. Maybe talk, maybe something. He had nothing left to lose. Chapter. The venue was a converted art gallery, sleek, cold, expensive, in the way that made wealthy people feel inspired. Gavin showed up in an ill-fitting blazer and a pair of Oxfords with worn soles. No one recognized him at the door. Inside, Julia was already on stage. She didn't wear power like armor. She wore it like oxygen. No script, no teleprompter, just her voice, low and steady. We teach people to build success like it's a ladder. But some of us never got rungs. We climbed using broken chairs, kitchen counters, and someone else's discarded bricks. She paused. So now, we're building our own floors. Applause. Standing ovation. Gavin didn't clap. He couldn't move. It was like watching a cathedral rise on the ruins of his ego. Afterward, he loitered near the edge of the crowd, watching. Julia was calm, radiant. She hugged strangers, remembered names, listened deeply. She didn't look like a woman who'd been betrayed, erased, tossed aside. She looked like she'd never needed him to begin with. He finally approached when the room began to thin. She was arranging a stack of notebooks on a display table, laughing with a volunteer. He stepped forward, and for a moment, just a moment, her fingers froze. Then she turned, expression unreadable. Gavin. Her voice was soft, neutral. He tried to smile. It cracked at the corners. I wasn't sure you'd recognize me. She tilted her head. I recognize shadows. That landed harder than he expected. I've been following, he began. Kindling's incredible, thank you. I mean it. What you've built, it's more than I ever thought. She waited. He faltered, then quieter. I made a mess of things. I thought maybe we could talk. Not for pity, just, I don't know, see if there's a way I can contribute, help, collaborate. She looked at him for a long moment, then leaned in slightly. You didn't just lose millions, Gavin. You lost the right to be part of what comes next. He swallowed. I didn't come to beg. No, she replied. You came hoping I was still the woman who needed your approval, but she doesn't live here anymore. He stepped back, breath caught. Do you hate me? Julia smiled. Not kindly. I don't carry hate, Gavin. Hate needs space. I filled that space with purpose. He stared at her. And for the first time in his life, he looked small, not physically, existentially. She nodded once, then turned back to her table. Behind her, Gavin stood frozen in the gallery light, surrounded by people who didn't know he'd ever mattered. That night, Julia wrote a note on the back of a donation receipt. She left it in the envelope addressed to the gala organizers, along with a check to cover 50 new grants under the Kindling Fund. The note read, Empires aren't built with noise. They're built in the silence after you've been counted out. JM. She didn't post about it, didn't mention the encounter. She just got back to work. The knock came just after 10 a.m. Ava Delgado wasn't expecting anyone. She rarely did these days. Her calendar was carefully curated to protect her time. But when she opened the door of the community co-work hub she'd co-founded with Julia, she froze. Standing outside in a wrinkled blazer and sunken eyes was Gavin Marin. She hadn't seen him in person since the last Lucent Field offsite meeting 4 years ago, when he'd cut her from the original product team and told Julia in a side meeting, Ava's too emotionally reactive. We need strategic minds, not sentiment. Now here he was, fidgeting with a folded sheet of paper, the skin under his eyes heavy with sleepless nights. Ava? He said, voice frayed at the edges. Can we talk? She said nothing, just stepped aside and let him walk in. The inside was warm, light spilled through tall windows. Plants flourished along wooden shelves. The faint smell of clove tea and eucalyptus drifted in the air. Gavin looked out of place, like a relic from a time no one missed. They sat at the far table near the back wall, usually reserved for mentoring one-on-ones. Ava took her seat calmly, folding her hands. He didn't sit right away, just stood there, shifting his weight. I've hit, I guess, the bottom. Ava raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. I made some choices, bad ones, I know that. I thought the floor wouldn't fall out, but... He shook his head. Turns out it was already crumbling. Still, Ava said nothing. He sat. I thought Julia would slam the door in my face, he continued. But you were always the reasonable one. You know what I used to be capable of. You remember the good, right? She looked him directly in the eye. I remember everything. That shut him up. He tried again, this time softer. I don't want charity, just advice. Maybe a small chance to consult? I've got ideas. I can help. I know where things went wrong. Ava picked up her tea, sipped once, then placed the mug down with quiet precision. You didn't just break bridges, Gavin. You salted the earth underneath them. He winced. That's not fair. I was under pressure. No, she interrupted, voice still calm. You were given power, and you used it to silence anyone who made you feel small, especially women. He leaned forward, more desperate now. I've changed, I swear. I'm not proud of how I treated you or Julia or any of it. I thought I was supposed to lead like that. Cut losses, move fast, play hard. That's what they all taught us. Ava stared at him, eyes unblinking. They didn't teach us. They taught you. The rest of us learned how to survive men like you. That landed like a slap. He sagged back into his seat. Silence stretched. Ava watched him. Not with malice, but with clarity. The kind of clarity you gain only after years of healing, peeling away your rage to see the hollow beneath it. You know what's funny? She said after a moment. He looked up. I used to replay conversations with you in my head, the day you demoted me, the way you said I wasn't objective enough. I thought maybe if I'd spoken differently, dressed more like Julia, smiled less, maybe I'd still be in the room. She leaned forward. But now I know the truth. You were never the room. You were just the noise. Gavin's throat tightened. Ava, please, I'm not asking for everything, just something. A door. Even a window. Her reply came like winter wind. Gavin, the only thing open between us now is the distance. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just lowered his eyes, as if seeing himself clearly for the first time. And then he stood. Thank you for at least listening, he muttered. Ava didn't move, didn't offer a handshake, didn't say goodbye. She just picked up her tea again and turned her chair slightly toward the window. As he walked out the door, the sunlight hit his back, but didn't warm it. He vanished into the world he'd once ruled, now exiled. Julia arrived 30 minutes later. She found Ava still sitting by the window, quiet, the tea gone cold. How'd it go? Julia asked gently. Ava didn't look up. She just said, he came looking for a lifeline, and? I showed him the difference between forgiveness and access. That night, Gavin sat on a bench outside the city library, watching the lights blink in the distance. His phone buzzed once. Spam. He turned it off. No one was calling, no one was coming, no one owed him a thing. And for the first time, he understood. He didn't lose Julia. He lost the future she was building, and no apology would ever get him back in. There was a myth people told about women like Julia Marin, that if they fought hard enough, endured long enough, clawed back power and held it tight, what came next would be peace, a soft landing, an earned stillness. But Julia knew better. Peace was never the point. What she had built wasn't meant to lead her back into quiet. It was meant to make noise for those still silenced. Sound. It was a Thursday when the email arrived from the World Leadership Consortium, an invitation to speak on their global stage. Topic: Transforming Power After Betrayal. 1 million people would watch. Journalists would dissect every syllable. A book deal would follow. A Netflix docuseries was already being discussed. Ava forwarded it to her with a... Julia didn't reply. She stared at the screen for a full 3 minutes. Then quietly, deliberately, she hit archive. Lucent Field was thriving, not just in revenue, but in ripple. The Kindling Fund now operated in 6 states. They'd partnered with libraries, school districts, and even women's shelters. Journaling kits, voice-to-print services, micro-grants. A 12-year-old in Kansas had used a Kindling grant to launch a pen pal network for kids in foster care. A retired nurse in Portland had started a grief writing circle in her neighborhood. And every month, Julia received handwritten notes, not from donors, but from strangers. One read, "You don't know me, but someone once told me I was too soft to lead. Now I lead a team of 6. Another, "I bought your journal the day my husband left." Page by page, I remembered who I was before him. She kept everyone, not in a trophy case, but in a drawer labeled Echoes. That fall, Julia took a step back from daily operations. She didn't make a speech. She didn't post an announcement. She just stepped back. Lucent Field now had leaders who rose from its soil: Ava, Jonas, Lily, and a dozen others who never fit the mold until they built their own. Julia began spending her mornings walking the perimeter of the converted house, the one Gavin once thought she'd never own. Now it buzzed with life. Workshops, storytelling circles, laughter, sometimes even quiet crying. All welcome, all whole. One morning she paused outside the sunroom. Through the glass, a young girl, maybe 10, was hunched over a handmade journal, tongue tucked between her teeth, writing something with fierce concentration. Her mother stood nearby, watching gently. Julia didn't knock, didn't go in. She just smiled, then walked away. That night, she opened a box she hadn't touched in over a year. Inside, the first journal she'd written in after Gavin told her she was holding him back. The pages were wrinkled, some stained with tea, others with tears. She read the first entry. March 12th, he said I don't fit his future. But he doesn't realize I was never part of it. I built mine in silence, under the weight of his voice. And the last entry, June 8th. He's gone, but the house still echoes with the sound of my own name. Not what he called me, what I call myself now, free. Julia closed the journal, and instead of adding another page, she wrapped it gently in linen, tied it with twine, and placed it in a wooden box marked Retired Stories. A week later, she walked into a small indie bookstore downtown, asked the clerk if they had any copies of Lucent Rising, a collection of essays from early Lucent Field founders. The clerk smiled, handed her one. "I love this," she said. "The founder's story is wild. Can you imagine going through all that?" Julia smiled softly. "Some stories. You don't imagine, you survive." The girl tilted her head. "Wait, are you?" But Julia was already walking away. Cha-cha-shum. That evening, she sat on the porch of the cottage she'd bought just outside the city. No noise, just crickets, a mug of chamomile, a sky full of quiet stars. Ava joined her, dropping into the seat beside her. "I got another call from WLC," she said. "They upped the offer. Said they'd fly you business class and give you a platform to talk about your journey." Julia sipped her tea. "Do they want me?" she asked. "Or do they want the story of the woman who was broken and came back?" Ava didn't answer. She didn't need to, because they both knew the answer. And they both knew Julia was no longer anyone's narrative device. She was her own author, and the last page didn't need applause. The next morning, she walked to the garden behind the old house, the one that had once belonged to Gavin. It was a writing class day. Half a dozen women sat in a circle under the willow tree, some in their 60s, one in her 20s, a few wearing grief like old coats, others wearing laughter like armor. Julia wasn't there to teach, just to sit, to write. A woman passed her a blank journal. "I think it's yours," she said. "You made this line, right?" Julia opened it. The inside cover was printed with soft gold ink. "For anyone who was ever told to be less, write louder. JM." She smiled. Then wrote the first sentence, not for publication, not for legacy, just for herself. "I didn't escape to be happy. I escaped to never need permission again." Lesson learned from the story. He said I was holding him back. So I bought the company that fired me and fired him first. Not every fall needs to be answered with a punch. Some of the most powerful forms of revenge don't come through retaliation, but through reinvention. Julia didn't win because she hurt Gavin back. She won because she refused to keep living inside the version of herself that needed his approval. This story reminds us that you don't need validation to be valuable. Forgiveness doesn't require reconnection. Freedom isn't just leaving someone, it's no longer shrinking to fit the world they kept you in. In the end, Julia didn't chase the spotlight. She built systems that passed the light on to others. She didn't seek peace. She created power with purpose, the kind that doesn't beg to be seen because it already knows its worth. And that's the most lasting kind of victory, when your existence no longer depends on who underestimated you, but on who you chose to become in spite of them.